Kia ora, koutou katoa. This is Hannah coming live to you for the very first time on Instagram. And I am in the beautiful Tairi region in Otago, Aotearoa, New Zealand. And first of all, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional guardians of this land, Waitaha, Ngāti Mamui, and Ngāi Tahu. I'm very honoured to be here, living here, carrying out my actions on this land today, watched over by the beautiful Mangatua, the mountain of the spirits, that gives me strength every day. So, this little video I felt inspired to share. Someone asked me the other day about closing loops, and I just felt inspired to share some of my experiences. So, I first came across this concept about 12 years ago, I guess. And today I'm going to talk about basically what my understanding of a loop is that needs to be closed, and why we would want to do it. And that's probably going to be it, because as my favourite Dr. Joe Dispenza says, once you understand the what and the why, the how will just come naturally. So, many moons ago, I remember a yoga teacher telling me about energy being in the belongings that we had, and I'd never thought of that before. And then later that year, someone said to me, oh, you know, people come into your life for a reason and then sometimes they leave. And this person just told me outright they were leaving my life, and no one had ever done that before, and it was so wonderful. It was quite freeing. There was a little bit of my ego that was like, oh, well, you don't need me anymore. And then I thought, well, I don't really want to hang out with you anyway. So it was really nice. So basically, a few years after that, I'd put this idea away, and then I was at another yoga retreat, and there was this woman at the table while I was trying to have quiet time during my dinner, and it was quite funny. Like, she was just bursting to tell me about Chinese medicine. And she said that something she'd learned that was really resonating with her was about closing loops. And she said, basically, this is the multimedia part of the presentation. Every time we start something and we don't finish it, it's open. So if you imagine your brain and all the things on your to-do list, we have all these open loops all the time. And there's some loops that will never close. Like if you have a child, you're never going to close that loop of being their parent. So yeah, all these loops are open, and I just saw in my head all these circles floating around my head, and they were all multicolored, and it was a really exciting moment for me. Like, I just went, oh, I totally get it. And it's taken me a while to realize that when we start one of these loops, it takes some of our energy with us, and it's out there. And it's not within us, and that's okay. Like, there's always going to be loops that are open, as I say. So basically, when I talk about open loops, that's what I'm talking about. So it might be a project you've started, it might be a relationship you have with somebody, a chat that's going on your phone, an email you haven't responded to. And we'll just take a moment right now to take a deep breath. And give ourselves compassion for how many loops we've opened. Because I guess the ideal that we're striving towards is when we open one of these loops, we do so consciously. And one of the places that I've found this to be really helpful is with my email lists. You know how you end up subscribed to all these emails, and then you get them and you're like, oh, I really didn't want to receive that. So that's one area in my life where I've been able to be more conscious and just say, okay, I'm not going to sign up to this list as much as I want to. If I need to know, I'll go back to that website. So it's a really simple one, basically. So that's the what, and it's pretty basic. Energy loops, energy's out there. And actually, before I move on to the why, I'm going to talk about my experience with energy coming back when the loop is closed. So I've found over the years that sometimes you'll get a bit of a surprise. So years ago I did the Marie Kondo clean out, declutter thing, and it was really beautiful. I love Marie Kondo. She says keep everything that brings you joy. So you're not focused on negative, like getting rid of things. You're focused on keeping what brings you joy, which is lovely. And I had a whole lot of books at that time. And when I was growing up, books were basically my friends. I lived in the country, there weren't a whole lot of people around, and I just loved delving into the world of books and thinking about what would I do if I was that character. And as an adult, I felt the need to have all these books around me, and it was kind of a safety mechanism. And there were a lot sitting there on my shelf that weren't being read, they weren't being loved, they weren't being appreciated. I had in the back of my head, oh, I'm going to have to read that book one day, but I never did. And I remember on one day I threw out 100 books. I dropped them at the local free shop, and if you're near me, it used to be in Waitati, and they were gone within a couple of hours. I drove past later, but after I dropped them off, I came home and I lay down on a yoga mat, and I had basically what can only be described as a panic attack. And I had not realized the emotional effect and the energetic effect that getting rid of something, and it was a lot of something, it was boxes and boxes of really good books that I felt ready to let go of. But all this energy came back to me, and at that time I didn't know what to do with it, and I had a panic attack. Yeah, it was a pretty full-on day, and I remember telling myself, you're going to get through this, it's going to be okay. But for the point I want to make is sometimes you'll let go of something and you'll be really ready to let go of it, and you'll feel totally like this is going to be fine, and sometimes it surprises you. I let go of something related to work this week, and it was quite shocking how much energy came back to me. I thought it was a really small thing. It was a Facebook group, a post I needed to make and share some information that I had. Sounds pretty small, but it actually just left me with this massive like, whoa, there was so much energy tied up in the idea of me sharing this document, and I had no idea. So that's something I just wanted to say about the energy, and I'll talk more about that later. Okay, so my next thing, my amazing multimedia presentation. Okay, is why do we want to close loops? So there's two reasons, and the first one is that everything in life is a cycle. Everything has a beginning and everything has an end. Everything has a beginning, everything has an end. And I think in our society a lot of the time we're not really comfortable with the end/beginning, because it's very uncomfortable to think about saying goodbye, having some uncomfortable emotions. And so why we want to close things off, for me, quite simply, is just honoring the basic processes of life. Everything has a cycle. And you know what? This cycle may not complete in your lifetime with some of the loops that you have open, and that's okay. So this is basically the why for me. The other part of it, and lovely teacher that I have at the moment, Love Day Rose Y of Wild and Good, was just saying to me, think of your energy like a reservoir. So here's a reservoir on top of a hill maybe, and there's all these little gaps in the reservoir, little leaks maybe where energy's coming out. And some of those you might want to be like a beautiful stream with plants growing along beside it. And that might be your beautiful job that you do that you love so much, or a relationship you have that you love. And there might be some other little leaks out here that you're not really paying attention to. But the problem is when you have too many of them, all your water starts falling out. So when you plug the leak, as Love Day said, the energy comes back in. So when I first started closing off loops, I didn't understand that life was about energy management, and I get that a whole lot more now. So the what of a loop is basically any energy that you have out there in the world, and the why we might want to close off a loop is simply because its natural cycle has come to an end, and also to help return some energy to us. So that's pretty much where I'll leave it, I think. And I'm just going to add at the end some ideas of how to manage that energy when it comes back in. So I'll put away my multimedia presentation. So we'll just take another deep breath and ground into this part of the video. If you like, you can close your eyes. So first, we just want to acknowledge that there may have been times where we haven't been conscious with where our energy goes, and that this will be part of our lives. This is part of our lives. We all have this problem. And also to acknowledge that when we're ready to close off a loop, we will intuitively know the right way to do it. And when it feels like it's going to be big, to be prepared for that energy to come back. To strengthen our immune system with grounding practices, going out into nature, to strengthen our nervous system with the same practices. And when the energy comes back, to be ready to acknowledge it might feel uncomfortable, it might feel different. You might not know what to do with it. And so something I like to do is I imagine the energy is like a little baby and I'm holding it in my arms. And I give the baby a name, like energy from that loop I just closed off. And I imagine I'm holding it and nurturing it and embracing it as part of me. And if I feel the energy moving, I often will go and do something with it, like go for a walk in nature, something productive. So I'm going to leave that right there. Basically, I just wanted to share my experiences. It's not advice that I'm giving you. You know what's best for you. And, oh, there's someone watching, Zealous Fashion. Thanks for joining. Hi. Apparently I can wave at you. Yay. Just my experiences, sharing them so that maybe you might want to have a think like, oh, how does this apply to my life? Are there some loops I really need to close, but I'm afraid to do so? The other thing I want to honor is I have really stuffed up at closing some loops in my life. Sometimes I have completely failed to do so, preferring to just run away rather than say goodbye. And then other times I've said goodbye, like I can think of an example in the last few months. I tried to say goodbye to somebody and it didn't go down very well with them. And I just want to acknowledge that you are doing the best you can. And sometimes people won't remember that we're all doing the best we can. And so basically, when you need to close a loop, make sure you're doing it with intention and integrity. And also for anyone who's a survivor of abuse or domestic abuse, please close the loops that you need to. Don't worry about the feelings of other people who might feel hurt by you disappearing from their lives. It's important to keep yourself safe first. All right, so I'm going to close the loop of this little talk that I've done. Yeah, maybe someone will be inspired by it, maybe not, but hopefully it's a conversation starter. All right, lots of love to everyone out there in the world, and yeah, just love, lots of love. Bye.